Okay guys, welcome back to tutorial number 27, and in this video we are going to learn about HTTP and a few terms like Rxjs and observables that are new in Angular 2. So right now we are serving the data that is hard-coded into the service, but in a real-world scenario we need to fetch this data from a web server. So we need to replace this hard-coded data with an HTTP call to the server. But before we proceed with the code, let us first understand the mechanism of an HTTP call and something known as an observable that is returned by the HTTP call. So we have our application that runs on the browser, and in our application we have the two components, employee list and employee details. Both these components make use of the employee service for their data, and right now the employee service provides hard-coded data to the components. But what we want is the data to be fetched from a server, and for that we are going to be making use of HTTP service that Angular provides. So inside our employee service, we are going to invoke the get method of HTTP, and in turn the HTTP service will send the request to the server. Now the request is going to hit a web service or a web API which will fetch the data from a database and send it back as an HTTP response. And the response we get from the HTTP service is called an observable. Now the employee service needs to process this data that comes as an observable and provide it to the two components. So the HTTP mechanism, we just have two steps. Send the HTTP request, receive and process the HTTP response. And this second step here is where the complexity lies. So let's focus on learning what this observable is and get a clear picture of the HTTP mechanism. Now to help you understand what an observable is and how to work with them in Angular, I'm going to use a very simple example of a newspaper company. So we have a newspaper company, and the company has a source of information. Now the company makes a request to this source to send in everyday news, and as a response to this company's request, the source sends in a sequence of information throughout the day to this particular company. Now once this information is received, the first thing that this newspaper company has to do is convert that information into the newspaper format. Now the source might just send in a single line of information, but this newspaper company has to map that information into a headline and then the body for that headline and so on. So now the newspaper company has the newspaper in the desired format and is ready to be distributed to all the houses. But wait a minute, does the company go around distributing to every single house? No. It hands out the newspapers to only those houses that have subscribed to this company. So if a new house subscribes to the company, then that house receives the newspaper as well. So right now, house 1 and house 2 have subscribed to this newspaper company, and only these two houses receive this newspaper. And after this point, what the people want to do with the paper is completely up to them. The company is nowhere concerned. Now in this house, the people might want to read the paper, but in this house, the people might want to make paper planes out of it. But the company's responsibility is done. So now that we have understood this basic example, let's see how we can relate this to observables and the application we have at hand. Now this newspaper company is like the employee service in our application. The source of information is nothing but the database. Now the employee service makes a request to the database using the HTTP GET call, and in return we get an observable of type response. But what exactly is an observable? Let's have a look at that. An observable is nothing but a sequence of items that arrive asynchronously over time. But one thing to keep in mind is that with HTTP calls, it is always a single item. And that single item is nothing but the HTTP response. So the observable we receive here is just a single item, which is nothing but the HTTP response. So in our application, the observable is not a sequence of items, but it is just a single item, the HTTP response object. So we have made a request and got the response, but the response is an observable, which is not the desired format for our application. So we are going to map this observable into JSON format. So we are going to use a map operator on this observable and get JSON data. Now the employee data is in the JSON format, and that is ready to be provided to these different houses. And the houses are nothing but the components in our application. So employee list and employee detail. Wait, but do we provide the data to all the components in our application? Again, no. We provide it to the components that subscribe to this observable. And since we need the data in the employee list and employee detail, we are going to subscribe to the observable from only these two components. And after this point, it is completely up to the component to decide what to do with the data. The employee list can display just the employee name, and the employee detail component can display all the details of the employee. So to summarize the HTTP mechanism, we have the following steps. The first step is that we make an HTTP GET call from the employee service. The second step, we receive the observable and map it to JSON format. The third step, we subscribe to the observable from the components that require this data. And the fourth step, we are going to assign that received data to a local variable in the view so that we can display it to the user. And finally, this term Rxjs. Now, observables are not a current feature with Angular or TypeScript. It is a proposed feature in one of the few in ES 2016, or it might be 2017. But right now, to make use of observables and the different operations on observables, we need to use something known as Rxjs, and that is reactive extensions for JavaScript. And this is an external library that we use to work with observables. And this is not the React from Facebook. That's a completely different thing. This is just an external library to work with observables. So now that we have understood the functionality of how observables work and how HTTP works in general, let's translate this into the code in our application. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.